Hey guys, Phil from Trail Talk here, and after 4 months of testing, we're reviewing my Marin Alpine Trail 7. So the Marin Alpine Trail 7 was designed to be an all-mountain enduro bike that really delivers big hit performance and stability while still maintaining Marin's mantra of just for fun. So the Marin Alpine Trail 7 is available exclusively through Bicycles Online in Australia, and there's two models. There's the 7, which they sell for $2,999, and then there's the 8 that sells for $4,299. The bike rolls on 29-inch hoops and has 150 millimeters of rear travel and then 160 millimeters up front. And just a quick disclaimer before I say the review, Bicycles Online does support the channel, but this is my own personal bike. I did get it for a slight discount, but I did pay for this bike with my own money. So let's start off the review by having a closer look at the frame, and looking at it quickly, you can just tell that this bike's built to handle some abuse. So looking at all the pivots, you've got nice double cleavage joints there, so really stiff. You've got a big chainstay, so again, nice and stiff there. And then you've got big bearings throughout, so that's going to increase the durability as well. So in the 4 months or so of testing, I have not had any issues with the durability of the bike. All the pivot bolts and the axles, they've never come loose, which is a good indication of accuracy and tolerances when building the frame. The paint is pretty cool too, with Marin's signature fade. My cables are not the neatest, but overall, the bike has been pretty quiet too. It is not the lightest bike, as you might expect. With double down tires and some sealant, we're at around about 15.5 to 16 kilos. However, this is pretty comparable with other alloy enduro bikes with this aggressive tire setup. Okay, so onto the geometry of the bike. It's definitely one of those bikes that you just jump on it and you feel instantly comfortable. It's modern without going over the top. So if you're coming from a shorter travel trail bike that's slightly shorter in reach, you'll definitely notice that jumping on this, the wheel's like slightly outer in front, and then you've got a bit more reach, but it doesn't feel like there's a big learning curve jumping on this bike. I definitely noticed that when I've jumped on a lot of the longer bikes that have recently come out, there's been a bit of a learning curve in terms of weighting the front end a bit more around corners. When this, haven't noticed that at all. So it's definitely got that really balance between agility and stability, and there's not really a big learning curve, but there's still plenty of room there in the reach. But yeah, you don't have to learn too much or get used to it. So I have a size large. As I said, the reach on the size large is 465 millimeters, and when combined with a pretty high stack of 633.4 millimeters, it felt pretty good to me at 185 centimeters, so I'm 6'1". When I swapped it out to my preferred 45 millimeter stem, but I might go to a 50 in the future, just tossing that up at the moment. The head angle is a slack 65 degrees, which is a real sweet spot for me on these kind of bikes. Slack enough to give you good confidence on the steeps, but not too slack that it upsends the bike's handling on the flatter stuff. The seat angle is decently steep too at 75.68 degrees, which I found pretty good for me, and I pushed the saddle slightly forward, but nothing too crazy, not slammed or anything like that, just a little bit forward from center, and that felt perfect for me and put me in the optimal pedaling position, and I never felt like it was too slack. The seat tubes are pretty short too, so if you want to size up, there's that option too. However, on smaller sizes, I would check the seat tube insertion, as there is a kink on the seat tube that may restrict this. To round off the package, you get short 430mm chainstays. This keeps things nice and fun. However, I never felt that it was too short to upset the balance of the bike. Okay, so now onto the suspension. So it is a linkage actuated single pivot. So you got the pivot on the seat stay here, and then you've got the rocker there, and it is on a trunnion mount as well. And I got the help of Bike Tech Expert on Instagram. I'll put his Instagram here, and he drew all the graphs and the kinematics for the bike, so we can go through that nerdy stuff now and talk about how the suspension system works on the Marin. So starting off looking at the anti-squat, so as you can see in the climbing gears, there's plenty of anti-squat there, well over 100%. And this drops significantly as you go through the travel, and again this reduces further in the lower gears, and that reduces pedal kickback, so that's good to see. It's going to climb really well. And because it's a linkage driven single pivot, it allowed them to control the leverage ratio over the shock. So the curve is overall progressive and it's a bit flatter at the start. That makes things a little bit more supple. And then as you go into the mid-stroke, that's where most of the progression is. And then it flattens out a little bit towards the end, and that allows you to get full travel, but there's still enough progression there to reduce bottom outs, which is enhanced further by the progressive nature of the air shock on the bike, and then allows the rider to further tune the progression with volume spacers without having to overload them with volume spacers, and that doesn't necessarily always feel good. So overall, it leads to a nice, consistent, predictable feel. So yes, there are some more fancy suspension systems out there that offer some fancy leverage curves and some crazy good efficiency. But the only real thing that I really notice is it's not as active under braking, but I only really notice this in situations where I probably shouldn't have been braking. So on rocky, chunky sections where I should have just let off the brakes and let the suspension do its work, and I'm on the brakes, that's when I only really noticed it. So it actually teaches you to ride a bit better. So that's actually a good thing as well. But something can be definitely said about keeping things simple, and it also makes the cost a bit cheaper, and that's definitely good to see as well. And I'm pretty impressed with the kinematics they're able to achieve with this bike. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked with that. So I weigh around 83 kilos fully kitted up, and I found 185 PSI in the rear shock provided the support that I needed without compromising the sensitivity off the top, which was around about 19 millimeters of sag, which is equivalent to around 29%. Marin does provide a setup guide, which recommends around 180 PSI for my weight, which I found slightly too soft. In my setup, the suspension really excelled over the chunk. I really liked how it used a fair bit of its travel to eat up the rocks, and the bigger volume negative air chamber on the Xfusion rear shock really helped with the sensitivity off the top. On smaller drops and jumps, the progression was evident, which was aided by the air shock. Only on bigger hucks to flat, which happened a couple of times, I noticed that it bottomed out. And I tried adding a little bit of pressure, but this led to a bit too much feedback through the pedals and it felt a bit choppy in technical sections. So I would recommend running a little bit less pressure and then adding a bigger volume spacer into the shock. This will give you a nice bit of ramp up when you're going on those big drops. And then also on the chunky stuff, it's going to be a bit more supple and it's going to track the ground even better. So if you do prefer the absolute butter feel, then a coil or a bigger volume air shocks are even bigger than what the Xfusion has. Probably something like a Fox X2 would probably be the way to go. But I really like the more playful feel on the current setup, and it really suits my style of riding at the moment, which is more of a bit of everything, and it makes the bike a bit more versatile. The more progressive mid-stroke gave it a nice poppy feeling, and it was a blast pushing into corners where there was plenty of support there, and you can really push out and boost out of the corners. So in terms of rebound on the rear shock, I ran 1 to 2 clicks from close, so on the faster end. And then in terms of compression, I always left it open. So there's 4 clicks of compression adjustment, and I always left it in the open setting. Up front, I ran 103 PSI and I took one of the 2 tokens out. But in the future, I'm probably going to take another one out and then probably bump up the pressure slightly. So go to around about 105, and I think that should be sweet. The recommended pressure on RockShox stuff is definitely way too low. And I found on all their new forks, I needed to take most of the spacers out to get close to using full travel. So depending on the situation, I ran 0 to 2 clicks of compression and then around about 5 clicks of rebound from fully closed. So a real highlight of the bike is the spec. So you're getting really great spec for the money, and it is really upgradable too. And that's definitely noticeable starting with the RockShox Yari up front. So the Yari comes with 160 millimeters of travel, and it comes with the debonair air spring. So the debonair air spring increases the volume of the negative air chamber, which makes it a bit more supple, and it allows you to add a bit more pressure for a bit more support without sacrificing that sensitivity that you would normally have had with the old air spring. I'm a big fan of the Lyric/Yari chassis. It's super stiff with the 35mm stanchions, and then the fact that you can upgrade the Yari to the Lyric by changing the damper in the future is a big plus. In the rear, you have the Xfusion O2 Pro RXC, which has a higher volume air can than the other versions. Being an inline shock, I was concerned that it would overheat on longer descents, but I can confirm at Threadbow, which is around an 8 to 10 minute run with 500 meters of descending, it remained consistent the whole run and didn't overheat at all, so that was awesome to see. It's super plush and offers rebound as well as 4 positions of compression adjustment, but I always left it in the open setting even when I was climbing. It comes with my favorite Xfusion Manic dropper post, which if you want to check out the review for that, I'll put the link in the description. But in short, super reliable, and I love the actuation of the lever as well. The drivetrain is another standout. I really like this setup, and I can see why YT used it on a lot of their builds. It's an E13 9 to 46 tooth cassette, so that actually offers more range than the 12-speed Eagle drivetrain, so that's awesome as well. And it's matched with the ever-reliable Shimano SLX derailleur as well as shifter, which is again super cheap and super reliable, so that's definitely going to be good if you need to replace it in the future, but it works awesome as well. So I think of drivetrains as a consumable item, so I really like how on the E13 cassette you can replace parts of it. So I'm always in those climbing gears, I'm pretty lazy, and those alloy cogs at the top, they usually wear out a bit quicker, so it's pretty good that I can change those over. And then combined with the SLX derailleur and shifter, it shifts pretty damn crisply. I have had no issues in it, and it's always shifted pretty well. Maybe not as crisp as a full SRAM or Shimano drivetrain, but it's pretty damn close, and I've been really happy with the durability and then also the range that the drivetrain offers. So the mix and match, they've been able to get a really cheap OEM price for it, obviously, so I'm pretty impressed with the setup that they've got here. So in the braking department, you get Tektro Orion 4-piston brakes, which really surprised me. Once I changed the stock pads to some metallic ones from Shimano and Entity, so I tested those back to back and they both worked pretty similar. The power really impressed me, and the big plus is that they use the Shimano Saint pads, so this design you can really get anywhere, it's super available and they work really well. You also get 203mm rotors up front and 180 in the rear, which were more than enough for my needs. The V-snap tires turn in very well. The compound may not be the softest, but the turn-in really impressed me. But on the rocky trails of Sydney, and I had to race 2 weeks after I built the bike, I had to run some more aggressive tires with some more aggressive casing, as well as a grippier compound. So for most of the review period, I was using other tires, so I can't really attest for their long-term durability. Other than that, the Marin 29mm internal width rims are durable and they set up tubeless really easily. You just need to put some tape on as well as put some valves in. And the Marin finishing kit was really good too. However, being on the taller end of a size large, I had to change the stem over from the 35 that was stock in the bike to a 45, but I will probably go to a 50mm soon. So I really enjoyed the climbing manners of the Marin Alpine Trail 7. In my current setup, it's definitely a bit porky, especially with that max grip up front and then double down casing as well. So it is pretty heavy. It's definitely a bike that you climb up to the top purely for the descents, but I really enjoyed the kinematics of the bike. So the climbing position was great with the effective seat angle at around about 76 degrees, and thanks to the tall front end, I felt nice and upright and comfortable, and for someone with back issues, that's definitely a big up for me. There's minimal bob in the saddle and very little when you're out of the saddle mashing on the pedals, and this is thanks to the high levels of anti-squat that we discussed earlier, and the suspension is still supple enough to give you good traction over those technical sections. If you do like to accelerate a bit faster, you can definitely lighten it up a bit, so run maybe just exo casing tires and maybe something faster rolling out the back. But I definitely feel if you're doing more undulating terrain, probably the Marin Rift Zone's a better option, and if you do like descending a bit more, you could probably beef that up. Put maybe 10mm extra travel on that, beef up the tires a little bit, and that would be a slightly more efficient package. But overall, on more undulating trails and stuff like trails at Old Man Valley and stuff like that, the bike was versatile enough and it was still fun on those trails. So now for the reason why you're all here, you want to know how the bike descends. And for my riding style, I'm kind of an intermediate to advanced enduro rider, and I don't do anything super crazy, but I do like to push my limits every now and then. This bike really suited me to a T. So just a bit more scope on the kind of trails I tested the bike on. So I tested on a variety of trails that I normally ride. So more flow trails or trail center stuff like Old Man's Valley and Hornsby. Then there was also longer alpine descents at Threadbow, so I raced Cannonball there, did the flow as well as the all mountain race there, and then on more technical terrain on the northern beaches that you've been seeing a lot in my recent videos. So I'm kind of like, as I said, an intermediate to slightly advanced rider. I only really hit drops around about 2 to 2.5 meters tall, so nothing super crazy, and then jumps are kind of intermediate size with max kind of like 4-meter gaps. And I climb purely for my descents, so I don't necessarily do a lot of undulating terrain. And for that kind of stuff, the bike suited me perfectly. As I said earlier, in terms of geometry, I felt really comfortable in this bike as soon as I sat on it. And for 98% of my riding, it was absolutely perfect. And then the other 2% was on really steep, fast technical stuff where I probably would have preferred a slightly longer wheelbase, but then I wouldn't have been able to have the shorter wheelbase I prefer for most of my riding and it wouldn't have been as fun. So I feel like this really is the perfect bike for me. So the slack 65-degree head angle is really my sweet spot for this kind of bike. It's not too far out in front of you that you have to use a lot more body language to get it around flatter corners, but it's still slack enough to give you plenty of stability when you're going down the steep stuff. And this was aided by the modern but not too long reach combined with the 45mm stem. And because of this setup, I could still rail corners thanks to those short chain stays, and because it wasn't too long or too progressive in terms of its geometry. It was just that really nice modern balance that I really look for. As I said earlier, the short chain stays didn't upset the balance of the bike at all, and I actually really enjoyed having those short chain stays because it made the bike really fun. And the balance was really noticeable in corners. I could really stay neutral on the bike and use minimal body language, and the bike would just rail those corners. And it was really good, really rewarding, and I didn't have to use much effort, which again, less tired on the trail, so that's definitely beneficial. I really noticed this on tighter sections of the trail where I really needed to make quick direction changes, and there were a lot more slower entries into the more technical sections. The bike really balances the stability to agility very well. It was very easy to place the bike where I wanted it to. It's not going to be as poppy as a trail bike, but really pre-hopping and pushing out of corners is very easy on this bike. On the more technical stuff, the bike was very active and planted. Setup was key here, as I said earlier. Go too high on the pressure, and there was definitely a bit of noticeable feedback through the pedals, and it was hard to keep my feet on the pedal. But then if you run slightly lower pressure and then add a volume spacer, those bigger air volume shocks really give that suppleness that you're really looking for, and because the bike has that higher anti-squat, I didn't feel like this impacted pedaling too much. On the bigger hits, the bike was nice and composed, but as I said, if you are doing those bigger hucks to flat, I would definitely go that volume spacer in the shock, and that should do the trick in giving you the progression that you're looking for. So it definitely is a very versatile bike. If you do everything from trail centers every now and then, or go to the bike park every now and then, and your majority of the riding is kind of in that enduro or mountain realm, this bike is definitely going to really suit you very well. Okay, so now onto some comparisons so you can really get a grasp of what this bike's good for. And I'm not going to do any bikes that I have spent like a really short amount of time on. I'll just pick two bikes that I've actually spent a fair bit of time on and that I actually reviewed as well. And the first bike that we'll compare it to is the Commencal Meta AM29. I really liked this bike when I reviewed it, so if you want to check the review out to that, I'll put the link in the description as well. So both bikes are very similar. Both are linkage actuated single pivots, and they have almost virtually the same geometry. Take some of this with a grain of salt, as the coil on the AM29 was slightly too soft for me. I rode the AM29, as I said, the Fox Signature one, and as I said, this was a significantly higher model than compared to what the Marin is, so it is a vastly more expensive bike, so again, take that with a grain of salt too. So the climbing kinematics of the Marin is definitely better. The AM29 is a bit more active, so on loose technical climbs, it excelled a little bit better, and it definitely had an edge there, but elsewhere, definitely the Marin was a bit better. The Commencal was a bit more supple thanks to the coil, and it is a bit heavier, so I did notice that it did track a little bit better in those rougher sections. So thanks to their similar geometry, both bikes were pretty easy to place on the trail. I could really get them to do what I wanted. But I definitely noticed the Marin was slightly more playful and a bit more poppy. But again, take that with a grain of salt because the coil on the Commencal was slightly too soft for me. And with an air shock, I don't know if it would be different, but definitely in this air shock configuration, the Marin was a bit more playful and poppy. It would be interesting to test both bikes back to back with both an air and a coil to definitely see the difference there. I think with a coil, they would almost feel pretty much the same. Overall, it just goes to show how good value the Marin is that these bikes are so damn close, and the only real differences are typically based on personal preferences, so that's awesome to see. So given that the entry-level Commencal is around 1k more than the Marin, I'd definitely be hard-pressed to pick the Commencal over the Marin, and if you do live in a more rocky area, then probably putting a coil on the rear or an X2, make it a bit more supple, it's going to pretty much perform pretty similar as to how I felt on the AM29. So yeah, I'd probably pick the Marin in this circumstance. So the next bike is the first bike you would have seen on the channel, and that was the Bird AM9. It's definitely a bike that I didn't wish I sold a lot of the time, so let's compare it to that. So the Bird is a bit longer with 10mm in the reach as well as 10mm longer in the chainstays. It's also a horse link compared to the single pivot on the Marin. First off, the Marin again definitely climbs a little bit better. Where the Bird really excels is in terms of stability. It's a bit longer and the suspension is really good at eating the chunk. and it definitely feels a bit more like a racer's bike. So if you're just out there to just go purely fast, then it's going to be a really good bike for you. Where it loses some points is in its versatility. I can have fun on trail centers type trails on the Marin and throw it around and have a bit more fun, where on the Bird it was a lot harder to do so, and I had to use a lot more body language to do that. Getting it around slower technical trails was also a lot harder, which is why for most of my riding style, the Marin is definitely the better bike for me in terms of geometry and all that kind of stuff. So again, both these bikes are very good at what they do, and they may suit other riders' needs a bit better than mine, but for my needs and my style of riding, I would probably go the Marin, and then with the extra change left over, I'd definitely upgrade some parts, maybe chuck a coil on there, upgrade the wheels down the track, and then upgrade that charger damper and the fork. But yeah, for me, the Marin was the pick. So let's start with the pros. So definitely the first one's the value and affordability of the bike. The spec that you're getting, the geometry at this price point, as well as the suspension performance, I haven't come across a bike that offers the same kind of performance at this price point. So yeah, definitely the value here. The second one is the versatility of the bike. It really balances that kind of all mountain enduro genre really well. So you got a fair bit of stability with that 65-degree head angle, but it keeps things nice and fun. So if you're that kind of person that does trails every now and then, and you're not always out there to do the big hits every ride, it still is really versatile, and you can have a lot of fun on those trails. And that's definitely what I do. I do ride a lot of different trails, and I do like that this bike, I can have fun on those trails. So yeah, definitely the versatility of this bike is really good. And then the last one, we touched a bit on this earlier, the geometry of the bike. What you're getting for the package is really good, and it's gonna suit a lot of people. It's not gonna suit the person that goes ridiculously fast all the time and want the most stable bike out there. It's definitely a bike that just feels instantly comfortable when you get on it, and you get a lot of those benefits that modern geometry offers. So slightly longer reach, definitely a slack head angle, and then you got those short chainstays to keep it fun. It's just a nice balanced package, and I've really enjoyed that about this bike. So onto some cons. It was hard to get some cons about this bike. The first one being mainly the weight, and at this price point, can't be too much of a complaint, but it is slightly on the heavier side. And I definitely noticed that with the climbing, the kinematics of the bike is really good, but you could definitely notice that the weight slightly slowed it down. The second one is the brake pads. Again, swap those out straight away, put in some metallic pads. So there's the Entity BPO3s, or there's the Shimano metallic pads, the ones you can put in the Saints. That's gonna make your braking performance 10 times better, and it's gonna work in wet conditions, dry conditions, and it's never gonna let you down. The power of these brakes is really good, they just need the brake pads to shine. And then the last one, not really a negative, but it took a little bit of time to kind of get the setup that I really wanted in terms of balancing that suppleness to kind of the ramp up that I wanted at the end of the stroke. But for most people, the baseline setup that Marin offers is going to be fine. Okay, so now onto the verdict. And as you can tell, I really enjoyed my time on the bike. It's definitely the bike the industry needs. Affordable, great value for money, bulletproof frame, never gonna let you down, and nice modern geometry that's not over the top, that's gonna suit everyone. Again, it's not a bike that's trying to be a trendsetter. It just nails that modern geometry without going over the top, so it feels instantly comfortable, and then you're getting great suspension performance for the money. So that's why I really like this bike. So yes, it doesn't offer those slight performance benefits that higher end builds will give you that cost around 2 to 3K more, but it's just a simple alloy frame with great components and great spec for the money and good geometry, and it's never gonna let you down. And with that money that you saved, you can go on a good trip somewhere, pay off your house or your mortgage or something like that. It's definitely great value for money, and it's never gonna let you down, and you're getting the performance, 95 to 97% of the performance that a lot of these higher end bikes will offer. So if you're looking for a bulletproof all-mountain enduro frame with good geometry and great parts for the money, it's pretty much shred ready out of the box. If you wanna take it to the bike park, change those pads over, and it's ready to go. This bike is absolutely awesome value for money, and it's definitely one of the best options in the market at this price point. So if you enjoyed this review, don't forget to give it a like. Also subscribe to the channel. Got plenty of reviews coming in the future. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. See ya.